Welcome to the National Citizens Inquiry Live. This is Thursday, April the 2nd, 2026. My name is Ted Kuntz, and I'm the chair of the board of directors of the National Citizens Inquiry. And my co-host this evening will serve a dual role. John Graff is both a director with the National Citizens Inquiry and a farmer, and we'll tap into his expertise as a farmer in this conversation tonight. Welcome, John.
Well, thank you, Ted. Well, good to see you.
Nice to see you. So we had a different agenda for tonight, but the world has changed a fair bit since we held the hearings in Kelowna at the beginning of the month. Most notably, the war in Iran. And you sent around an email earlier today that talked about the impact, particularly for Australia, with their access to their ability to produce food, because I think the figure was, John, something like 90% of their fertilizer comes through the Strait of Hormuz. And so I think we're going to be in a very challenging situation come growing season this summer and fall. And so I thought it would be important for us to have a conversation about the impact of that war, both on access to fertilizer, but the increased cost of fuel, and what that might mean in particular for Canadians. And so maybe you want to just talk a little bit about the dependence that farmers have on both fertilizer and fuel to produce their crops.
Sure. Yeah. No, thanks, Ted. Yeah, it's going to be a kind of a challenging season. Now, a lot of farmers who have been watching have placed fertilizer already and purchased it. We have purchased all of our fertilizer back in February. We have not taken delivery of it ourselves yet, but we should be able to get that. Some of our other land base that we work with, we have taken delivery of nearly all of the fertilizer. And I think that's going to be a similar with a lot of farmers in Canada. They've been scrambling to get it on hand. Prior to this war, the urea fertilizer was already planned to be in short supply. There was already, due to plant shutdowns and other things like that, there was potential for shortages. And so we all were kind of scrambling. If we were paying attention, we were scrambling to deal with that. Fuel and the cost of fertilizer. So since February, fertilizer has gone up approximately 50% in cost versus what it was. And fertilizer in February was still, relative to the crop prices, was fairly expensive. It was not looking like a very profitable year for a lot of grain farmers. So what we see happening with the Strait of Hormuz is a change in about 40% of the urea, which is the nitrogen and other nitrogen fertilizers that go through there, a drop in that. And 50% of the world's sulfur goes through the Strait of Hormuz. And sulfur is needed in a lot of like the oilseed crops, like soybeans and canola, rapeseeds, mustards, and that type of crop has a high sulfur requirement. And so that could put a dampening on both production and on plant health, and the resulting crop that we'll have this fall, if that's low. It'll affect countries like Australia, New Zealand, those places that don't have a good oil and gas sector, which is where these fertilizers are produced. It's using petroleum fuels, more natural gas.
So what's the situation in Canada? I mean, I understood that Saskatchewan in particular has a lot of fertilizer. Mm-hmm. Does that serve the needs of farmers in Canada, or are we dependent on international supply for fertilizer for the crop?
Well, we are dependent to a certain extent on international fertilizer, especially if you are located around the border areas, one of the coasts, so Vancouver type of area, the lower mainland, Atlantic Canada, and even parts of Quebec and eastern Ontario. Those areas are bringing in, from overseas, Saudi, Morocco, those type of locations where they have lots of natural gas and production. Places along the southern part of the prairies where I'm located and all the way across, there is a lot of fertilizer coming in from the United States into this area. And then when you get, Alberta produces a lot of fertilizer as well, and Saskatchewan. There's plants in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta producing fertilizer, and that is going back to the U.S. So there's kind of in places due to freight, some is coming north and some is going south. But most of the fertilizer that enters into North America comes through New Orleans. And that's the major place. That's where fertilizer is priced is located at New Orleans. And it comes up the Mississippi, and that sets the price as it comes further north from New Orleans. The prices get higher. I expect, because of the issues in Hormuz and stuff, that we'll see restrictions on the New Orleans fertilizers, and that then will cause some of the Canadian and Midwestern fertilizers out of Wyoming and other locations like that to fill that void, raising our prices. I don't think we should see, we might see logistical issues, but we shouldn't see actual supply issues outside of those logistics. And because of that, though, we will see some higher prices, definitely some higher prices, and gas and oil, which is, the natural gas is our primary source for this, which will probably increase.
John, for those of us that aren't farmers, how dependent is farming on the use of fertilizers in Canada?
Well, especially now, very, very dependent. There's been a shift over the course of the last couple generations. Since the 50s, we've gone more and more to continuous cropping, for soil health and to cut down on erosion. We've quit cultivating and summer following. Because of that, in the old days, when you're in that summer follow year, your crop from the previous year breaks down and releases its nutrients back into the soil. But when you leave that straw there, and we're farming into a straw bed, that straw uses nitrogen in its breakdown. So the bacteria and the fungi that are breaking down the straw that's left out there, they consume a large amount of nitrogen in that breakdown, because straw is low in nitrogen, but it has carbon in it. And as they're doing that breakdown, we have to supplement them with fertilizers, and that can be either a commercial fertilizer or manure. And we do that, and then that allows that crop to break down during the season, putting carbon back into the soil for the plants to pull from as well. So it's a symbiotic relationship. And if we pulled the fertilizer out, you will see our crops go yellow and I would venture to guess, probably 50% of the production that we would see right now. The plant would be less vigorous and unable to compete against weeds, and so you would see an increase in weed production and things like that. Now, there are ways to alleviate that if you have time. If this was planning for next year, we would probably be looking at doing some plow downs. And so we would take a piece of ground, We would plant probably a legume like clover or that type of thing that pulls nitrogen from the air. And then we would plow that crop back into the soil to capture nitrogen from the air, put it into the soil. But in doing that, you've taken that ground out of production, and there is no food being produced. And we probably can't get enough nitrogen to deal with things like we would be in a commercial fertilizer world. But it is possible given time. This year we don't have time. So we're dependent upon what we have, and even for next year, if we want to prepare for next year, because again, like we said, most farmers, if they've been paying attention, should have their supplies locked up or in hand for this year. Australia, even with all of their issues, they are scrambling to get their supplies locked up from other locations, Morocco or Saudi. Saudi still is Strait of Hormuz, but for these other locations, and Venezuela potentially. And I think they're going to be into that 70 or 80% of their needs met. So they're still 20% short or 30% short. But as that takes place, we should be, if we're preparing for a next year without fertilizer, we should be doing those plow downs this year. And I don't know of anybody who can afford to do that really with the economics that we have. So we're still going to be dependent on commercial fertilizer and that type of thing.
John, as I listen to you talk, it seems there's a lot of complexity to ensuring that the right nutrients are in the soil to grow crops.
Yeah.
It almost sounds like a farmer has to be a biochemist as well as a farmer.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Every farmer that's worth his salt is a biochemist, just naturally. You're a biochemist, you're a biologist, you're a microbiologist, you're a chemist, you're a mechanic,
A veterinarian.
Yeah. It's a jack of all trades, and those that fail were a master of none.
So what is this going to mean for the smaller farms in Canada? What's the impact that you anticipate these global circumstances will have on the smaller farms?
Well, the problem that those smaller farms have is they don't have the capital that they need to make the changes typically. Mm-hmm. But the strength that they have, there's always two sides to it. The strength that they have is that they can do other things to alleviate their need for international fertilizers, such as have a livestock operation that is scaled to the size of their smaller farm and produce the manure that they need for it. Manure is a fabulous fertilizer. It meets most of the needs that you have, all the phosphorus, the potassium, sulfurs, organics, and then not all of the nitrogen, but a great majority of it. And so that smaller farmer, he can feed some animals and convert some poor quality produce or grains and straw and hay and that kind of thing, and he convert it through an animal into a valuable fertilizer. And where the large scale mega farm, they can't just get that many animals put together to cover that land base. Mm-hmm. So a smart, flexible, small farmer can actually excel in here if he's willing to make that adjustment. Now,
there was some concern expressed about the use of manure as a fertilizer. Is that concern justified? Is there reasons to be concerned about using fertilizer on crops, particularly like fruits and vegetables? Or is there talk to me about the use of manure.
So some of the talk about concern about manure has to do with things like E. coli and salmonella. If you've properly composted that, the heat process that happens during the composting and the oxygenation and the bacterial attacks on that should sterilize those types of diseases that could be in there. We have to also realize that E. coli, salmonella, botulism, all of those diseases are natural and everywhere. They are on your surfaces in your house. They're everywhere. And they just may have a higher concentration in some manures that aren't, and some crops that aren't handled properly would have a problem. If you have concerns about manure, I would say that we probably, as a species, a human species, wouldn't exist without that over our, the last 1,000 years.
Because that was the prime source of fertilizer, was it not?
Yeah. And there is, I can't speak highly enough of manure. I see the results. I've worked with it. A lot of I tell my kids as I'm training them that our animal operations is for the purpose of producing manure. The more animals we can get, the more manure we can have, the more farming we can do, and we can offset expensive commercial fertilizers. So I really don't see that problem being there. Especially when you're dealing with things like wheats and canolas and peas. Well, peas you wouldn't need fertilizer even on like that. But any of your cereals and your grass crops, you can't beat it. It provides moisture holding capacity, carbon back to the soil, and if you compost it or pile it for half a year before you spread it properly, and work it into the ground so that it doesn't run off. It gets bound into the soil. It's the best thing going.
But again, it has to be properly managed. It requires a level of knowledge that is that knowledge being passed on from generation to generation, or because we've talked about the loss of the family farm, where it would be in a go from generation to generation for multiple generations, and that seems to be coming somewhat to an end. Is it not?
Yeah, the some of the problems that we have in passing farms on to the next generation have to do with partly hockey, and when the kids and public schools, when the kids are gone from the home and have gone from watching dad and mom work for the day and understanding what they're doing, and they're off in a foreign place. If I go to town, that's foreign country to me. And so when they're there, they're not learning or appreciating what the lifestyle and the honorable task of growing food. Then the other component is it takes a lot of money to start a farm. So they need to be have assistance in down payments and that kind of thing. And when land is pushing $5,000, $10,000 for prairie land, that's difficult for a young person to get their foot into. So, and then with most farms, if you have 4 kids, how do you split it up 4 ways and still be viable? So those are some of the issues that kids have. Outside of that, if the kids are working around and they should be starting young, it's a different mentality here on the farm than what you see in a town where kids aren't allowed to work until they're 16 or 18, and here, kids are 11, 12, 13 years old, and they're driving $2 million worth of equipment, and that could crush most people's cars with just a look, and they're out there doing it, working 12, 14-hour days, or more. If this wasn't a public thing, I could be a little more honest on the hours, but it's a different world, and when kids are removed to play, it doesn't transfer on, and so.
Well, it's hard work. It requires dedication, long hours, uncertainty, takes courage. It's
Yeah, it takes this aspect of faith that you're putting all of your money, your entire life savings, to where you may have just a few $100s left, plus you're in debt, and you put all of that out in the ground, and you say, this is a great idea. We're the world's best gamblers.
But thank God that we've got farmers that are willing to gamble, because if we didn't, where would our food come from?
Yeah, well, and that's some of the concerns that we would have heard during the NCI there in Kelowna is when you put all of the pieces together, that of all these different little areas, it results, and then add this war, add the Strait of Hormuz, add fuel prices, and all of a sudden you are facing true famine potential. And famine doesn't always mean drought. It means it can mean logistical issues, storage problems, natural disasters, and geopolitical aspects. And we are always just months away from a complete famine. Now, those manufactured famines, like what we were heard at the NCI hearings, there are those that seem to be positioning themselves to capitalize on those famine situations, and hope, and in their mind hoping for a long-term famine that they can have a profit realized from, and potentially expand their control. And that is quite concerning. And so from that standpoint, I think these small farmers hold the key to being able to address that. And we heard lots of people testifying to the attack on the small farmer. And I think, though, we need to be looking for that low-hanging fruit, the easy to capture aspects where they can excel and outcompete some of these bigger guys. Having less capital is sometimes a better thing, because you don't have the interest payments. When interest goes high, you don't have a return to investors that is demanded, and you have the ability to be flexible. So if they can do that, could be good times ahead.
John, as part of your testimony at the NCI hearings in Kelowna, you talked about the growth of the lab-grown foods. And it seems like there's considerable investment in that way of producing food. Do you see that as a realistic threat to traditional farming?
Oh, definitely. And that's, I think, what we've seen in the government's own documents is that is their goal. If you go to Global Horizons Canada website, and you can see, like in the reports on digital convergence, you can see them discussing that as the vision for Canada, to have lab grown or yeast grown type, vat grown products. That's their goal. They can, and to a certain extent, they're not wrong that is potentially efficient, an efficient way to produce protein, and it can utilize capital potentially better than we can on ranches and that kind of stuff. But you do not have apples to apples type of a product. You have protein versus steak. You have lactoglobulin, beta lactoglobulin versus ice cream. You know, who doesn't want ice cream? And so apples to apples, they can't outcompete what a farmer does, which is utilizing sunlight and carbon dioxide to produce crops that are converted through a bacterial fermentation vat in a cow, or a starch degradation and protein degradation like a pig or a chicken, and turn that into amino acids that we need. We can't survive without it. They can't beat that. So typically when someone has a farmer using sunlight, chlorophyll, and carbon dioxide, has kind of an unfair advantage over a manufacturing facility in a city. But typically what you see is those large industrialists, they use lobby efforts and greased palms in order to try level or turn the playing field in their favor. And that's what you're seeing, I think, from what the testimony would show.
Well, we saw them build a huge cricket factory in London, Ontario, a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And I don't know that citizens of Canada were lobbying for crickets as their source of protein, and yet somehow the money was there to produce that kind of a factory.
Yeah, I believe that factory has gone bankrupt, though.
That's my understanding, with tens of millions of dollars of federal investment without a return.
Yeah. And that's the other thing we typically see historically. Any of these businesses that need government subsidy and government startup, they always end up being unproductive and non-competitive, and they rely on subsidy and graft in order to make it. And that's, you just see that naturally.
Can we also add deception to that list, John? Because my understanding is that those lab grown proteins, they're not required to label that in Canada. Have I got that right?
Yeah. Again, lobby efforts to not require that labeling have been successful, but it's again greased palms of the politicians to vote.
Because I suspect that if you polled the average citizen and asked them whether they would like their lab-grown protein to be labeled so that they could make an informed choice when they're purchasing food, I can't imagine any Canadian that would say I don't want to know that. And yet, my understanding is that the government has refused, or even they're supporting the lack of labeling for that lab grown proteins.
Yes. Now there is a double-edged sword to labeling, but I agree with you that there is no way that the average consumer would want to have either the lab grown, and there's kind of two types of protein that gets this name called lab grown. There's the true lab grown, which if I don't hold me to exactly the numbers, but I believe 2 pounds of lab grown protein or or lab-grown beef requires the killing of 150 pregnant cows. They extract the stem cells from the fetuses, and they use that to grow the 2 pounds. Now, I believe that the 150 number is decreasing and they're getting it more efficient. Maybe they're down to 100 dead cows. Maybe they'll get it to where eventually it's down to 30 dead cows to grow 2 pounds. But that's what they're looking at. The other type of protein is what you see at a lot of your fast food hamburger joints, the plant-based. So it uses peas and maybe almonds and potato starches and soybeans, and mixes it with a product that is a heme protein that's a byproduct of yeast grown in a vat. And they subject a genetically modified yeast that has never been tested, according to the Canadian government's records that we showed at the NCI. It's never been tested to see if that genetically modified organism is safe. They tested the original organism. They looked at how they genetically modify it. They've approved the process. They approved the original, never tested the genetically modified. If you go to the government's website, then they subject that yeast, genetically modified yeast, to a chemical stimulation to cause it to produce this heme molecule, like hemoglobin, like blood cells. And they've never tested, according to the government's website, they've never tested for those chemicals to see if there's any residual in the product. They've tested for other chemicals, but not these ones, apparently. And then once they produce a protein, either a meat like protein or a milk protein, in the case, it's clear and stated plainly in the Health Canada information that they never tested the actual milk protein. They tested milk to determine if this new genetically modified product is safe. They use cow's milk, not the genetically modified product. And so you have to ask the consumers out there, is that what you want? Dead fetal stem cell meat, or an untested kind of interestingly derived test in your food? And I would say that most people would say no. I would think so.
Well, I can't imagine anybody saying yes. And so then it begs the question, what's behind this development? Because it doesn't sound economically feasible when you say 160 dead cows are needed for 2 pounds of beef. It doesn't sound like it is a sufficient alternative to real food. And yet it seems like that industry is growing at the expense of real food. And so I'm curious what your thoughts are about what's the agenda here, or what's the motivation to develop that industry when it seems to have so many elements that consumers don't want.
So if you look at the 2030 agenda? You look at some of those, and they stated there that in some of their goals that they will change consumption patterns. And those consumption patterns really doesn't matter what you want. It is a case of them I think I'm back. Sorry about that. I sounded like a true Canadian there. I apologize for the internet system. And so the Oh, we should back up again. Where were we going with that? I lost track.
Well, I was saying, like, I don't understand the motivation here. It
Okay.
doesn't seem economically feasible. It doesn't seem like, in terms of quality food, it's what we want. And
Right.
yet there's a growth of this industry. And so I'm trying to understand the agenda, who's behind this, what's its purpose. And when you start to speak to it, it sounds like this is social engineering. It's not what consumers want.
Right. Yeah. It's they're going to manipulate the consumption patterns of the people. They're I urge everyone to go to Global Horizons Canada's website, the government, and look at, just read the digital convergence reports. It sets the vision of the country. The government's vision for Canada is set out and plainly told to us. And they talk about implementing these types of foods. It is easy to have large capital dedicated into large plants to grow all of the food for Canada through these types of systems and make phenomenal returns to the shareholders. In doing that, they consolidate the control of the food into very few hands. And if you look at who owns those companies, so in the milk proteins, it's primarily driven by the Israelis. That's who, and again, who has driven the war in Iran, which is kind of concerning from two standpoints. That the production of food is going to be reduced because of the war, and there are people who have the solution to that and can make a return. The other segment of that is the meat proteins is owned by, and you can look this up on the websites, or in my footnotes from testimony, Bill Gates, Google, Tyson Foods, and a bunch of Asian investors. And so it's kind of the same names that you keep seeing popping up. And so I think that explains a little bit.
Wow, that's a little disconcerting. I would say maybe not a little. There's a lot there to be concerned about. What are farmers thinking about this plan for Canada?
Well, farmers are so busy working and trying to deal with the short-term financial plan things that I think this is news to a lot of farmers too. So while we are looking for additional farmers to come forward to the NCI and testify to what they're experiencing, I think to some of them, they think that these problems just happen to themselves, that they're unique. And it's astounding to some of them to hear these stories and see potentially through communication the dots being connected. And so that is kind of interesting that the NCI has that position to connect dots through just hearing people's testimonies. And it may be why some of the powers that be don't like NCI's operations.
Well, John, you've suggested that the NCI has gotten in some ways more, I don't know if the word is flack or what's the right word, as a result of this set of hearings on Are Farmers Safe in Canada than we had with the previous conversations on COVID, the government's response to COVID, and the question, are children safe in Canada? And I have to say, I'm shocked by the kind of reaction to the NCI in holding the hearings about food. It's what are you hearing from farmers, or what are you hearing as a reaction to the hearings that we conducted in Kelowna?
Well, without so what am I hearing? I am hearing that some of the farmers are concerned that the government may be a little bit or exert some retribution out there, you have to recognize that there's things like Farm Credit Canada, which is the federal government's farm lending agency, and it has been very liberal in lending money out. So it lends. Originally, it was a lender of last resort, and now it's one of the main lenders in a lot of the processing plants, in a lot of farms, a lot of machinery, a lot of animals are all financed by FCC. At one time, it was just your friendly neighborhood government lending agency. During the convoy and that time period, they admitted to spying on their clients and informing the government and the police on farmers who were taking place in the convoys. And they said that they would direct their management to continue doing so. If that's their modus operandus, you can imagine what will happen to your operating loan or when it comes up for renewal if you are seen as being contrary to the government's plans, for everybody to drink smoothies instead of eat steaks. That there's that type of thing. There is the risk of just the regulatory agencies coming and finding all sorts of things. Everybody's a criminal. Just it's selective enforcement that keeps you from being fined or harassed. And I'm fully expecting it myself. From the positions that I've taken and this type of thing, I'm fully expecting to be find some issue being brought up. And then we've had some witnesses who have called us and they feel that they're being doxxed, and there's already been RCMP complaints made because of threats against some of our witnesses. So
well, and we had a number of witnesses that backed out at the last minute because of threats or concern about retribution for testifying at the NCI, which speaks to the larger question that we asked in the hearings: are farmers safe in Canada? And it sounds like in many ways that they're being challenged in the same way doctors were challenged during COVID, that you either follow the agenda, you follow the ideology, or life will get rough for you and you may lose your career.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And your kids will lose their inheritance, and your family line will lose the legacy that's been built over generations, and Canada will lose independence and food security. It's a serious issues. Yeah.
So in some ways, this might be the most important conversation that the NCI has had since we began in 2023.
Well, it is important. Is it the most important? I'm not going to discount the doctors who stood for what was, the report from NCI says that the actions were wrong, that of the government were wrong. It's stated that the vaccine is not safe nor effective. We see that in the reports based upon the evidence, based upon the testimony. Is this more important than that? No, I can't say it's more, but it is. They are equal, and they are all pieces of the pie.
Well, and I would agree with you, John. But there's an urgency. If you can't go very long without food. Correct. And what was that line from Kissinger, that if you want to control the population, control the food?
Yeah, he who controls the food controls the people. He who controls energy controls whole continents, and he who controls the money controls the world.
And we're seeing efforts to control in each of those domains.
Correct. Yep.
And it's one of the reasons I believe that the family farm is a threat. Is when you farm, there's a certain amount of food sovereignty because you can feed yourself. But if it comes out of a factory, that's a whole different situation.
Yeah, and if you remember back into the COVID time period, and you've seen people standing up, and there was a lot of opposition to what was going on when it came to control of their paycheck and thus control of their ability to buy food and put a roof over their head. The people who were opposing had to step back and accept the directives. If you have a group of people that are able to produce food and alleviate that control mechanism, people will not be as inclined to step back and accept the directives. And so it's a strategic move to control people through controlling the food.
So what advice do you have for Canadians in the coming year when we think about the potential shortages of food, the risk of famine, at least in some places, maybe in Canada? What should Canadians be thinking about?
You really have to understand where your food is coming from. It doesn't come from a grocery store. That's just a pathway through to you. The food comes from hardworking families that are producing food to feed their family and yours. and the interesting thing is the mentality is to try produce it as cost effectively as possible. If you find a farmer who is gouging and trying to make an exorbitant amount, you're probably seeing someone with a different mentality. You want to know that your farmer is a good steward of the land. And so in order to understand this, you probably have to circumvent your local grocery store and know the farmer, or be connected into a production system where everyone has agreed to be small farms and a certain type of process of farming the land. So know your farmer and start buying directly from him. I think would be what would be best, directly from the farmer, or from, like I said, a little network that could help with the logistical aspects. Mm-hmm. When you start to do that, you start to allow those small farmers to again disengage from other control structures, and that gives you freedom in your food and him freedom to grow what you need. And I think that's the primary thing that Canadians can do is get in the vehicle and go see a farmer. And give him a pat on the back, because probably something didn't go very well that day.
Well, John, I noticed in the news of the week that Robert Kennedy Jr. Was at a number of events across the United States, but specifically in Florida, where they just instituted new legislation to require the hospitals there to purchase food directly from farmers as a way of trying to secure more nutritious food for people that are in hospital in recovery. I don't know if you saw that.
Mm-hmm. I didn't see that, but that makes a lot of sense. But that's contrary to the way Canada is going. In Canada, they are removing the ability of even food banks to take donations directly from farmers. And so you're seeing food banks with bare shelves. You're seeing hospitals and other institutions are not allowed to buy eggs and garden produce from farmers because of a concern over the health aspects of it. That's the direction Canada is going.
Well, we're going in exactly the opposite direction of what Make America Healthy Again is promoting in the United States.
Yeah.
I mean,
And
I feel, your recommendation to know your farmer, I feel very fortunate. I live in the Okanagan in British Columbia with lots of farms, small farms, and I've got the ability to access my fruits, my vegetables, my eggs, chicken meat, a number of products directly from the farmer. You just call up and say, "Can I come down and get some things?" Yep. It's beautiful to have that relationship.
Yeah. Now, recognize that for the farmer, having people stopping in all the time to get a box of food is actually quite costly to the farmer in time and energy. So there is a need for some compensation for that time. But he's normally used to taking such a small part of the whole piece of the food budget that if you pay what you normally would, he thinks he
He's
hit
done well.
yeah. It's say on a loaf of bread, we're lucky if we get 5-10 cents out of that loaf of bread for our wheat. It's a fraction of what you pay for what we get.
Wow. This conversation about the safety of food in Canada is becoming more and more complex as we continue these conversations. There are many aspects to it.
Yeah, and one of those things we just mentioned a little bit ago. You mentioned Robert Kennedy, and the U.S. just recently put in some regulation to require labeling of country of origin labeling on the products down there, and people applaud that, and it is good in some aspects, but realize that the only way to fulfill that country of origin labeling is to identify and digitally track each animal from birth, so that they can prove that what the country of origin is. That's the only way it can work. And this would be government mandated. And so all of a sudden, in our attempt to know where our food has come from through government mandate, we've established the control structure to be able to identify where your animals are, to cull them.
We're welcoming the digital control system.
Yes.
And then if we think it's going to be limited to animals, I think we're being short-sighted.
Yeah, you're exactly right. You're exactly right. Because you look at what the Health Canada, which oversees CFIA, their vaccine program on animals kind of matches what they've been doing to humans. And one is vaccinate to kill, and then they have to kill all the animals that are vaccinated, or vaccinate to live is the other program, and that they vaccinate the animals and then they digitally identify and track them for life and limit their movement, which is the other thing that happens with humans.
Okay, we're going down the rabbit hole, Mr. Graff.
Well, that's from their website.
Yeah. I saw in the news this week that the Cattlemen's Association of Canada, whatever it's called, is pushing back on the digital tracking of animals.
Yes.
And are going to put together their own risk-benefit analysis.
Yes, I have to applaud them for that. It's not without the people and the ranchers and the standing up and loudly and pushing back. If you look 6 weeks ago, those same Cattlemen's Association people were saying we must accept what the government is doing, otherwise they will come and crush us and implement harsher penalties on us, to now realizing that the people have the voice, I think. And so Oh, we're back. You notice that the decision by the Canadian Cattlemen's Association and stuff came after the NCI hearings. And I would, it's not all the NCI's strength, but it is a loud voice that put the pieces together that made, I think, the decision had to be made. Otherwise, they would expose themselves. And so I applaud them for that. I want to see them continue to represent the people and the farmers' wishes. That's who ultimately pays their way. And but everyone out there, we need to remember we should not be complacent. That the others, the people that we are seeing being identified at the hearings, they continue their push. They still have the same goals.
John, you've helped to underscore the importance of the NCI conducting more hearings on this question: are farmers safe in Canada? And the board has agreed to do that. We're looking at probably hearings. I think we're looking in June. And at this point, we're looking for venues to hold the next set of hearings. And so hopefully we'll have information for our audience in the next few weeks as we firm up those plans, and we can announce another 3 days of hearings on the question: are farmers safe in Canada?
Yeah, I think we've heard a lot of response from people, and the groundswell is just beginning. I think in this, as people realize that their voices can be heard, that a citizen-led, a citizen-funded, independent organization, shall we call it even an institution now in Canada, is able to hold the powers that be, the government and the other institutions, hold it accountable and make them become transparent. I think that will gain momentum. And hopefully this topic opens the door to the next topics that would come along and prove that the people's voices can be heard. Just seeing the change in the CCA shows that the people's voices do make results.
Makes a difference.
Yeah.
John, thank you for this conversation. You've helped me to understand even more the complexity of farming in Canada, and I think many will benefit from this, and hopefully then we can become better advocates for standing up for our farmers.
Well, I know I sure appreciate working with you, Ted, and I appreciated all of the testimony that came in Kelowna and the people who stood up, and then all of the people out there that listen and have been making the phone calls and sharing the testimony of the hearings. It makes a difference. I think the farmers appreciate it as well.
Thanks again for joining me tonight.
All right. Thanks, Ted.